Welcome to this module of Professor Messer's free CompTIA A+ certification training course on the Windows command line. I'll be your host, James Messer, through this module where we're going to discuss the requirements from CompTIA Exam 220-601, Section 3.3 and Section 3.4, and 220-602, Section 3.1. We're really getting down to details inside of the operating system, how to run different utilities, and really getting down to the command line level to run those. A number of the utilities that you have access to can only be used at the command line, so it's useful to know what those are. We're going to talk about how you would get to the command line so you can run some of these utilities. We'll look at managing directories, copying files, comparing files, and editing files. And then we'll go into more details about diagnosing the operating system, tuning the operating system, and there's a number of useful command line utilities that don't fall into any of these categories that we'll also look at. Let's first talk about getting to the command line prompt. We've done this a number of times through this course, and we've done it by clicking our Start option, choosing Run, and typing in cmd.exe, or just cmd. The executable is automatically going to run. This is a 32-bit command prompt, and if you're doing anything at the command line within Windows, this is the program you'd like to use. If you go way back in the Windows and operating system world, you may also see people typing in command.com to be able to run a command prompt. What this really is a 16-bit version that's really just on your system to provide a bit of compatibility with older applications. This is not what you should probably be using day to day at the command prompt. Always use that 32-bit full-blown Windows cmd.exe to do everything you're going to do at the command line inside of Windows. We're going to do this throughout this module, and we've already done it in a number of other modules. We type that start command, click run, and then type cmd, and we get that command prompt screen. Now, from this command prompt, you've got a number of options available to you. If you wanted to go to your system menu up here and pull down the properties for this, you could change the font that's being used. You could change the different layout of the screen, how many lines are going to be saved that you could backspace over and look at your buffer, or how big the window is going to be overall. You could also change the colors. If you'd like the background to be white and the text to be green, you can make all of those changes so that it's customized to the way you would like to use this command prompt. And then once you make any of these changes, I'd like to change some of the colors, maybe make some of this with a red background and click OK. It says, do you want to apply this just for what you're doing now? Or would you like to save it? Next time you start cmd.exe, it's going to start up with whatever we configure in this property screen. One of the first things you'll need to know from the command line is how to manage directories. There's a number of commands that are very simple, and we'll start with the dir command. That stands for directory. We type dir, we hit return, we'll get a list of everything in the current directory. And this is the way that we can use to list out the files and directories that might be underneath the folder where we currently are residing. To change between directories, we use the cd command. We'll use that to move back and forth through the directory tree on our hard drive. Let's say you'd like to make a directory. The md command makes a directory, and we can then use the cd command to change directory into that freshly made directory. And if you're finally ready to get rid of a directory, we use the rd command. You can see these are very simple two-letter commands. That's because we use them a lot. If we had to type out change dir every time you wanted to change a directory, it would get very old very fast. You often use these commands multiple times as you're moving back and forth and around a hard drive. Let's give it a try on our system and see how easy it is. On our system, let's make a directory that we're then going to use to copy and move some files into. And I'm already in my Documents and Settings folder under the Professor Messer folder. And I told you there's a dir command. If we type that and hit enter, we'll get a list of all of the files and directories contained underneath that directory. You can see here, there's a dot and a dot dot. Those two directories are at the top of every single list that you'll do. The period, the single dot, stands for your current directory, and the two periods prior to that is the directory just before this that refers to the Documents and Settings folder. It's not that important that you know for the CompTIA exam, but that's a good reason why you happen to see these come up every time you do a directory command. If something has the word dir next to it, like this desktop, that means there's a directory in this folder called desktop. If there's not a directory connotation there, if it just has the number of bytes and a name, that's referring to the name of a file that's in that directory. So we're seeing there's really a multiple number of directories here. There's a desktop and a favorites and a my documents and a start menu. And then there's a single file called document.txt. If we wanted to move into one of these directories, change directory, we type cd a space, and then the name of the directory. So if I wanted to move into My Documents, but notice that My Documents has a space in it. And when you're at the command line, a space is very important. One of the great shortcuts available to you is the Tab key. If you hit Tab, this command line will automatically put for you everything that matches what you just typed in. If there are multiple matches, you can keep hitting the Tab key until the one pops up that you're interested in doing. And notice when I did that, it put a quotes in here and it put My Documents in place so that all I need to do is hit Enter. And now we've moved under the My Documents folder. So now when I do a dir, it's only going to be the things in My Documents. Let's say we wanted to make a directory here. If I use the md command, I could make perhaps a directory called temp. And if I hit enter, it doesn't tell us anything. If we did this wrong, it would give us an error. But if I do another directory, you'll notice that I now have books and music and pictures and presentations and temp. So just like that, we made a directory. I want to use this temp directory as a space that we can go into, copy some files, and use it as a workplace during this particular module. So I'm going to use the cd command in temp to go into the temp directory. You can see there's nothing in there currently. So we're going to use this particular area as a place where we can copy some files, change some files around, and really test out a few things. If you're going to do this on your system, it's probably a good idea to make a temp directory somewhere on your system so you can do a similar thing. Now that we've got a workspace set up and we can start working with some files, let's talk about some of the commands you can use at the command line to start copying some files over. One is called copy. The copy command simply copies a file. And we're going to look at the syntax of that in a moment, but this is what you'll use to copy files from place to place, whether they're within the same hard drive or maybe they're from another hard drive. It could be from across the network on a shared folder, and we'll simply use this copy command to do that. There's also a command called xcopy. This isn't one that's often used unless you're copying a lot of files at once, maybe entire directory trees. The xcopy command is very good at that. There are a lot of really nice command line functions with xcopy that can do huge amounts of your hard drive all at once. If you wanted to copy somebody's entire user folder from one drive to another, the xcopy would be a very good choice for that. Another great command is called move. If you wanted to take files from one place and move them over, not create a copy of them, but actually pick them up, move them, and delete them from the other drive where it's being copied from, you use the move command. It's really doing a copy and then going back and deleting the original. So instead of you having to go through that process of copying and then manually deleting, this is one command that does it all in one fell swoop. And there's also a delete command. The delete command does exactly what it sounds like. You want to get rid of a file, it's del and the name of the file, and that file is deleted. And finally, if you just want to rename a file, you don't like the current name, you'd like to name it something different, and this is really useful if you happen to copy over a new version of a file. Often you don't want to delete the existing one. We'll rename it to something else, and we'll use the ren, the rename command, to be able to do that. Let's copy some files. Now that we know those commands, let's try one. Let's copy from the root of our hard drive, the existing hard drive, which is the \, a file called ntloader. We know that ntloader exists there, or else our Windows wouldn't start up. So if I do that, notice it says one file is copied. And if I do a dir, now we have a file that's in our directory. And it's this ntloader that's 250,032 bytes. There's also a text file that's in the root of my drive. It's in the same place. I'm going to use the copy \. It starts with a P. It's not page file. I'll keep hitting tab. There it is. It's preamble.txt. And if I hit enter, it also copies that over. So now I have a couple of different files here that are in my temporary directory that I'm going to be able to play with. Let's say that I didn't want one of these files here. I wanted to delete it. So we use that del command to delete, and then we put the name of the file. Let's say we wanted to get rid of ntloader. Remember, don't do this in the root of your drive. You don't want to delete ntloader, but since it's in our temp directory, if we delete and then do a directory, we can see now it's missing. The only thing there now is preamble.txt. It's a very easy way, and notice you don't get a lot of questions about are you sure? It just deletes it. That's one of the challenges at the command line, is it's very powerful. You want to be careful because sometimes it can be too powerful. And finally, let's say the preamble command, we'd like it to have a different name. So we'll use the rename command, and we'll rename preamble to, let's pick another name. Let's just call it pre.txt. And we'll hit enter, and another directory, and you can see just like that, we've changed the name of the file. So these are great little utilities we can use at the command line, start moving files around our drive, renaming files, and if you're ever in a situation where you have to recover some files on the hard drive, maybe copy some back into the root directory, you use these commands to be able to manipulate those. Let's say you've copied some files over, or perhaps you've copied some earlier and now you have another file on your drive and you'd like to compare these files. You can do them at an entire disk level, or you can do them down to an individual file level. To look at comparing and looking at copying files at a very large, broad level like that, you can use things like the disk copy command. You don't use this much anymore. Floppy disks are going a little bit out of style, but if you wanted to take everything that was on one disk and copy it to another disk in its entirety, this is the command you would use. Once those two disks were created, there may be a time where you want to compare them and see if those entire disks are identical to each other. And it's the diskcomp.com command that compares both of those disks. Often it's really just a single file we want to check. We'll check a file that's in the root directory of our drive, and we'll check a file that's in our working directory of our drive and see if they compare, see if they are exactly the same. And it's this nice little FC command that allows us to do that. Let's use our FC command to compare a couple of files. I'm going to do a directory here in our temp area, and I have back in this folder now, I've placed ntloader, and I've got a file called pre.txt that we copied earlier from the root directory of our drive. But I've made a few changes, so I want to see if these really sync up to what was really in the root directory of this machine. So I'm going to use that FC command to look at the root version of ntloader, and I'm going to compare it to the existing version of ntloader. So I'm not going to put a backslash in front of that. And let's hit enter. And it says that there are no differences encountered between the ntloader that's in the root directory of our drive and the ntloader that's in the current folder where we exist currently. Well, I'd like to do the same thing with this pre.txt and see if it compares to the preamble.txt that's on the root directory. So I'll use the same command, and I'm going to look for preamble.txt that's in the root, and I'm going to compare it to pre.txt. Now this is going to compare the contents of the files. It's not comparing the file names. We know the file names are different. So if I hit enter, it's telling us that actually there are differences, and it shows you that text has been changed in the pre.txt version, and it breaks it down for you and shows you what lines in there have been changed. So you can see instantly if there are differences, and we certainly know something has changed between these two. So we may not want to delete one. We may want to check the one and see which version is newer and which one is older, and then decide what to do with them from there. When you're troubleshooting files in the operating system, perhaps your boot.ini file or another configuration file, you may find that you need to edit the file. But if your Windows isn't working, then you're going to need to learn how to use the editor at the command line. And fortunately, this Microsoft DOS editor that comes from the DOS days when Windows did not exist still exists in our Windows XP, Windows 2000, and later Windows systems. And you can see this program is called edit.com. It's a built-in full-screen text editor, which means you can make changes to any text files and you don't even have to be in a Windows environment. I know it's crazy thinking back to those days when we were always working at the command line when there was no Windows. This was what we used to edit. There's also a command line editor that runs from a line editor, which is not something that is a full screen editor. It's called Edlin, and it's still there for the diehards that want to do things at the command line. We're going to use this full screen editor called Edit, because that one is much easier to use than the one that's a line editor, and it's the one that we need to know about for our CompTIA exam. When we start working with these files, it becomes very easy in this edit program to open files, to save files, to search and replace through those files, and finally to close those files. And what I'd like to do is bring that editor up right now and give you a feel for what that looks like. Let's try working with this edit command. I have a couple of files that are in my directory currently. The one I'd like to look at is this preamble.txt. And if I use my edit command and then put a space and then the name of the file, preamble.txt, and hit enter, it's going to bring up a full screen view of this. Now this is very similar to the pull down menus and the arrow keys that you might move around in a word processing program in a Windows desktop. This is just done in a text-based mode. To get to those pull down menus, you use the Alt key and F or E or S or V. So you use the Alt key and the first letter that's on those. Now also you'll notice if your mouse is working, your mouse will work with these as well. So this is almost like using that Windows environment. So if you wanted to open a new file, there's an open command and it takes you to a dialog box that allows you to open the files. You can save them from here. I can even search through there. I'd like to find the words liberty and hit OK, it's going to search through that file until you find that particular word or those set of characters. This becomes very useful in very large files where you need to search all the way through it for one specific configuration setting that you then can change. Maybe I'd like this to be Liberty, and maybe I'd like it to maybe have a couple of underlines in front of it, and then save this file with the file save command. And now we've just saved those changes into this text file. We can reboot our machine if it's a configuration file, if we've changed our boot any, and see if our changes were able to take effect. So even though we weren't in a Windows environment, we still have exactly the same type of capabilities. Even though it's not fancy graphics, we're now in a text-based mode, still a fully featured full-screen text editor. There are a number of tools of the command prompt you can use to start doing some diagnostics and tuning of the operating system. You can start by running a program called DiskPart. This is a disk partitioning and drive information program that can tell us more information about how the fundamental partitions are configured on the drives that you have right there at the command prompt. So if you don't have access to the Windows utilities that allow you to graphically see what's going on, this is one of the tools that you can use. Once you've identified what the partitions are, you may want to run a check disk, which checks your hard drive for not only logical errors in your file layout and your directories, but it also checks the physical layout of your drive and makes sure that the media is working properly itself. There's a defragmentation program called defrag, where you can, if you want to run this from the command line, allows you to defragment the hard drives so that you can have things run more efficiently and tune your operating system a bit. And finally, there's a mem command, which shows you memory usage at the command prompt. This isn't quite as useful as it used to be when it was just a DOS environment, but it can tell you a little bit more about if there's programs that do run in a command line environment, what that memory configuration is and how it may be affected by different things you're doing on your system. Let's look at the partition configuration. We'll use that diskpart command and we'll hit enter, and it takes us through a configuration, tells us what computer we're on the Prometheus machine, and then just gives you a prompt, disk prompt. And if I hit a question mark, you can see there are a lot of different things we can do with the partition. So this is an easy way from the command line. If you want to add a mirror, if you want to delete things, if you want to change the configuration about a partition, if you want to scan the partition and look for disks and volumes, all of this information is there. Now, it's very important, of course, as I always mention, make sure you know what you're doing in here, because you can make changes in this configuration that can have dramatic effects on the availability of your data once you get out of this command. So be extra careful with changing some of these things at a command line. It's a little bit more difficult to use than our graphical front end we had in our disk management program in Windows. So just something to keep in mind. If we want to exit out of here, we type exit and we hit return. I also told you there was a mem command that shows us just a breakdown of how much memory we have available in this command line prompt. As I mentioned, this isn't completely applicable to our entire Windows environment. We certainly have a lot more memory in Windows than what this is showing. This is giving us a feel for how much memory is available in a command prompt. And it's not very often you have to deal with memory in a command prompt anymore, but if you do have programs that still run in a command prompt and they are not Windows programs, these memory values may be a little more important to you. The command prompt can be a pretty daunting place. It just gives you a prompt and then it's up to you to figure out what to do. Fortunately, there's a help command that lets you step through where you can go with this, what you can do. And this help command will list out every option available to you at the command prompt and even gives you some places to go from there. There's also a nice version command if you're at a command prompt on a machine, especially if you manage a lot of different computers and you're remote desktoped in and you aren't quite certain what version of software of the operating system is running. You can run this VER command, this version command. It'll tell you what version you happen to have there. Our help command is very extensive, and if you type help, there's so much here that it even scrolls off the single screen that we have here. So I'm going to back up a little bit just to give you a feel for all of the different commands that we have available. We're only talking about a few of them for the CompTIA certification, but you can see there's a whole lot of capabilities here of how to change things, programs you can run, configuration settings. And if you're ever at a point where you're trying to figure out what does that do, you can type help and then the name of the command, and we'll give you more information about the options available. Something like the version command is very simple, but something like the xcopy command is a little more comprehensive. So having all of this online help really helps you along if you're at a prompt, you're trying to figure out how do you use that flag and that command option within the xcopy command. You can do a help xcopy and it'll list out all of those for you and tell you exactly what those prompts do. As I mentioned, that version command is also there. We'll type VER, and it shows you the version of software you happen to be running. We're running Microsoft Windows XP version 5.1.2600. That particular 5.1.2600 you don't hear very often, but that does specify a certain version of the operating system. And if you go to Microsoft's website, they do specify different version numbers that way. So there's many different versions of Windows XP. There's a Windows XP, there's a Service Pack 1, Service Pack 2, Service Pack 3, and each one of those has a different version number associated with it. So if you happen to know what those are, you can look at this and say, oh, 5.1.2600, that's Microsoft Windows XP Service Pack 3. Just an easy way you can keep track of what's going on with the versions of your operating system. Another nice tool to have at the command line is one called Expand. What Expand does is allow you to uncompress files that have been stored on your hard drive, on other installation media, and they're usually used when you're in a recovery situation. There are Windows files that are stored on the Windows installation CD. There may also be files that are stored in something called cabinet files or CAB files. And what these are is very similar to a real filing cabinet where it looks like it's one file, but inside of that one file, there are compressed versions of multiple files within there. And you may just want one of those files. So you can, using the expand command, virtually pull open the filing cabinet, grab the one file you want, and put that file on your hard drive so you can do something with it. There are files that sometimes can also be compressed individually. They may not be in a filing cabinet file. And you'll notice that the files have an underline in the extension name. So if you ever are looking at installation media and you notice that some of the files look a little odd because they all have this funny little underline as the last letter of the extension there, they're probably compressed, but you're able to expand them out using this file expansion utility. The expand command is included right into your Windows configuration because it's very often you might need to get to that. So expand/?mark gives us all the options that we can use for the expanded files. So if you wanted to look at a file and expand it out, you can use some of these: rename, display a list, display the source file destination. There's a lot of different options for using this. And if you're working with technical support, they'll give you the command line that you use. If we look at some of our installation media, I'm going to do a directory of D:/I386. That's my Windows CD, and that's the 386 directory where all of my files are located in there. And I'm going to hit enter, and boy, it's listing a lot of things. So I'm just going to hit Control-C right in the middle so you can see some of these things. Notice these files have the last letter of the extension is an underscore. So the ones that have the underscore are files that are probably compressed, and we can use the expand command to uncompress those files. So if a file that's in your Windows configuration, for instance, may have been inadvertently deleted, and all you need is that one DLL file or that one font file, you can use the expand command to pull it off of your CD and uncompress it and then put it back on your hard drive. A very easy way to recover those files. We've worked a lot with the command line in this module. We've gotten a command line, worked with some directories and files. We moved some files around, we renamed them, we compared them, and we edited them with our full screen editor. We also ran some diagnostics programs, and we saw some OS tuning utilities we could use. And finally, we even looked at expanding out files from our installation media so that we could help in a technical support type situation. For more A+ videos, to participate in our message boards, to participate in our wiki, and much more, you can visit our website, freeaplus.com.